This is Ryan Barker with Schellman. Hey, are you a cloud provider that has already earned your ISO 27001 certification and are looking at ways to perhaps advance or enhance that certification? Well, I've got great news for you. In fact, in this installment of the Truth Series, I met again with a very close friend and colleague that is going to talk to us about ways to optimize and enhance that 27001 certification specific for cloud providers. Danny Manimbo. Welcome back, sir.
Again, Ryan.
I appreciate it.
Looking forward to it.
All right. So last time we were here, we had a very good conversation related to ISO 27001.
Right.
And part of that conversation, you mentioned a couple. I had to write this down. 27017.
That's right.
And 27018. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, if I remember correctly, that was after you've already earned a 27001 certification or in the process of earning that certification.
Correct.
And those are called extended. Is it extended or extension of a control set? What's the phrasing there?
Extended control sets is what they are, but they're basically extensions to your existing 27001 certification.
Now, if I recall correctly, the 27001 certification, there were two phases, right? Or you focus on the ISMS, those clauses. I think you referenced like 4 through 10, and then there was a separate piece related to the control set.
Correct.
So when we're talking about extended control sets, we're not touching that ISMS, are we?
There are a couple of considerations which we can talk about today, but yes, there are bolsters or extensions to that existing Annex A control set from 27001.
Let's dive right into that. Cloud providers, right?
Correct.
So 2717, 2718, what are they?
Yeah.
Why do they exist?
Yeah, so if you're a cloud service provider, there is 27017, which is only 7 additional controls based around cloud services security that aren't necessarily called out within the existing 27001 Annex A control set.
Okay, got it.
For 27018, and they name all these very similar to each other, so it's a little bit hard to keep track of, but that is actually, there's 25 controls in that extended control set, so a bit more than 17, and that's actually specific more on the privacy side of processing PII in the public cloud.
Got it. So, that's interesting. So you said about 7 additional controls or so on the 2717.
Correct.
On the 2718, there's sort of a PII or a privacy component to it. Is that, are we talking 27701, is it, with the PIMs, and for 2718, or could you use 2718 with 27001? Talk to us a little bit about how that all works together.
A little bit to sort out there. So we'll start with the privacy piece, and then we'll come back to 27017. So 27018, again, processing of PII in public cloud is a specific privacy control set. It did come out before 27701. So a lot of people thought, with the introduction of 27701, there's a processor track, there's a controller track, which we talked about in our initial video.
That's right.
Does that kind of essentially replace the utility of a 27018?
Exactly right.
So the answers kind of vary depending on your use of those controls and the type of privacy compliance you want to demonstrate.
If I can interrupt, do you find organizations that have gone with 2718 that they continue along that path, or do they pivot to 27701 and focus on their PIMs?
We've seen both. We've seen both. So there is a mapping of the 27701 controls back to 27018. And they do map to just about all of them. I think there's a handful, maybe 2 or 3, which don't map over 27701.
Okay.
Kind of the reason where, so some of our clients keep both. Some drop 27018 once they do, add on the PIMs and the extension control set, which comes with 27701 because of the coverage there.
Got it.
So it depends, but a lot of folks say, well, why does 27018 even exist anymore if it's covered through the PIMs? But, we talked about it in our initial video, it's a pretty big uplift to add 27701 because of the management system components.
That's right.
And a lot of folks may not want to go through that entire implementation, so they'll just go with the control set. It's technically the lighter add of the two.
That's right.
So there is still, kind of a use case out there for it.
And so the value proposition here is that there could effectively be a little bit of a lighter lift, lower level of effort, and still be able to speak to, if you're a cloud provider, some of those privacy elements and security elements without overhauling the entire ISMS, right? So you've got the 27001 certification. It speaks to your ISMS. It also speaks to your Annex A controls. So this is not a very unimaginative name, but an extension of those control sets, right?
Exactly.
probably now is a good time for us to take a little bit of a deeper dive into 2717, and then we'll talk about 2718.
Okay.
Give me a layman's term explanation of exactly what 2717 and those 7 controls.
Sure.
What does that actually do for an organization?
Yeah, like I said, so you have the existing, there's 114 controls in Annex A of 27001. A lot of folks know them, familiar with them. What they didn't have was any necessarily controls that are specific to cloud technologies.
Okay.
So now these 7 controls, it's not a huge lift, but there are some specific controls in there around, cloud service providers and the things that they need to be aware of and demonstrating for their offerings. So you might have how they harden, virtual machines, how they segregate environments, et cetera. So that's really the idea behind these. And what they are is they're additions to the existing Annex A domains.
I see.
So they might be in addition to A12, which is operations security.
Okay.
There might be in addition to A6, things like that.
Got it. So that's 2717.
Correct.
2718. What's involved with that? You said publicly identifiable information, right?
Personally identified. PII.
Personally identified.
Yep.
Yes. The other PII.
So, exactly. So those are 25 extended controls. So like I said, it's a bit more. It's about 3-4 times the amount of controls of a 27017.
That's right.
And that goes through everything from consent, the proper use of the PII. They're using it for the terms that they said they would, accuracy and quality of the information they're obtaining. There's security considerations. But again, specific to PII, whereas 27001 is just information security in general, geographic location where that information is being processed, et cetera.
Seems like a lot of work. Seems like you would be well on your way towards 27701.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about though the relative level of effort? Is it really 3.5, 4 times more work to do a 27018 than a 27017 extension, or is it just a totally different animal when you're talking about personally identifiable information?
Yeah, it's a different lens of which you're looking at for your existing 27001 certification, right? So, is it 3 to 4 times the amount of work? It's kind of tough to quantify, but there are kind of some different components that you need to look at. Both of them are similar in that, and we mentioned they're just control sets. Not necessarily framework components that go along with that, like there is with the PIMs, but there does need to be some demonstration of how these controls were implemented into your ISMS. For instance, your statement of applicability. That would need to be updated to show how these controls, are they applicable or all applicable or some not, why. Your risk assessment needs to now account for privacy-related risks if you're going down the 27018 route. Cloud security related risk for 17, internal audit needs to cover these. So there are management system considerations, but not necessarily specific clause requirements around these.
Well, let's talk strategy here just a little bit. If perhaps you're an organization, cloud service provider, and if they're operating in the EU or in APEC and other jurisdictions, is it all the same, 27701 with the PIMs or 2718? Is there a real benefit to one or the other? If I am certified in 27001 and perhaps with the 27018 extension, good enough?
Yeah, I think it depends who's asking. So certainly 27701 has been, getting a lot of popularity and steam since it was released in 2019. It's probably been the fastest growing of the standards and likely overtaken that of 27018 just because it's how much it enhances the ISMS is really kind of recognized worldwide now. So a lot of folks, a lot of the bigger tech companies are promoting this. So that's certainly got a lot more popularity because of how comprehensive it is.
A lot of 27s, a lot of 7s, a lot of 2s. So I want to restate this. Okay?
Sure.
All right. Test my understanding of this.
Okay.
27001 is the certification.
Correct.
27018 or 2718 is the extended control set that is added to the 27001 certification.
You got it.
Okay? And that will speak to personally identifiable information in public clouds. Okay?
Right.
That is not the same thing as a 27701, which is focused on the PIMs.
Correct.
So 27001 with a 2718 extension does not equal 27701 with a personal or with a privacy information management system.
Yeah, so they're both extensions on top of your 27001 certification.
Okay,
right?
Got it.
So your 27001 certification would be updated to basically reflect, an alignment with either of those standards.
Got it.
Whether it be 27701, 27017, or 18, we kind of just update the scope language to clarify.
So the foundation is still 27,001.
Exactly.
Okay.
They all build off of that.
But the PIMS is the an information management system.
Correct.
So it's a different. It impacts the clauses 4 through 10.
Exactly, because
Okay.
the others you're talking about just the controls.
Just the controls.
With the PIMS, Privacy Information Management System, that actually has separate clauses, management system clauses.
Gotcha.
In addition to your ISMS.
Okay.
So that's why they kind of call it out as a separate management system.
So let's help organizations out here then.
Yeah.
What would likely be an effective strategy? It sounds as though you would need to start with 27,001 regardless. If you're considering any of these extended control
Correct.
sets or 27701, which is going to impact the information management system. Either way, you start with 27,001, right? What would be a more a reasonable approach? Is to just get the 27,001 certification done first, go through the certification process. You have 2 rounds of surveillance audits. Then, during those surveillance audit periods, introduce 2717 or 18 or maybe enhance the PIMS with 27701. Is it to do it that way or to do it all at once?
Yeah, I suppose it's like any compliance initiative. You can start small, go ahead and get feedback like a SOC report. Maybe you start with the security.
That's right.
Go ahead and start distributing that SOC report to user entities, interested parties. If you're getting feedback that, hey, we'd like to see an availability covered, confidentiality, maybe something you could add in subsequent years.
Got it.
ISO is very similar. Maybe you start with the base, which is 27,001, and then listen. What are your interested parties saying? What are potentially what's holding up some big deals with potential prospects or customers, vendors, et cetera? A lot of them asking about 27701. Maybe that's something we need to look into in the future. Now we can better plan for that now that we have the foundation of 27,001 there, and we can kind of talk about what the deltas are.
Absolutely. So an organization can, in fact, focus initially just on the 27,001 certification. Do they have to wait through 2 rounds of surveillance audits to then add on 27701? Or can they, in year 1 of the surveillance audit, immediately go in to 2717 or 2718?
It's a great question. We get that a lot. Am I stuck with this for the next 3 years because my cert's valid that long? So you can actually update your scope at any time. It could be during your annual surveillance review, part of your research, or it could be done off cadence. Hey, we've got a big need to update our cert now. We don't want to wait a year until our surveillance. Can we just do a specific scope expansion review, targeted towards whatever change we're making?
Excellent.
Yeah.
So it sounds like there's some flexibility.
A lot of options.
Yeah, and you can take an incremental approach. You can start small and continue to add.
Yeah.
You don't have to do them all at once, right? You can do perhaps 27,001, get the certification, then enhance the scope with the extended control set prior to a surveillance review. Do a surveillance review, then add 2718 if you want, or just go straight to 27701.
Exactly.
Options are good.
Yeah.
Options cost. Let's talk about how much this is going to cost. So I want you to give me a cost for the 27,001. Okay. All right. So I'm an organization.
Sure.
All right. I want to plan. I want timelines, budgets. But one of the most important questions that I'm going to have is how much is this going to cost? Right.
Sure.
So 27,001. That base foundation, that certification, how much is that?
Let's just put a number out there. We've got a separate video which kind of talks about the description of the cost for year 1, the initial certification, which is the highest, surveillance review years. But let's say you're in your initial certification and we're charging $40,000.
$40,000. Okay, and that's for the certification.
That's for the certification.
And then I would do 2 rounds of surveillance reviews. What are those going to cost me?
Maybe low 20s, could be high teens, just depending on the scope of your program.
Okay, got it. So
that gives you a ballpark.
over a 3-year period, all in, anywhere from $65,000 to $80,000, right?
Right.
So let's say that then, I'm considering maybe 2717, 7 additional controls.
Right.
Just throw that in for free, right?
Of course. Yeah. So we're probably looking at another $8,000.
Okay. So relatively small.
Yeah.
Relatively small level of effort, relatively small overall increase to the overall budget. It seems reasonable. 2718, 3.5, 4 times as many controls.
Yeah, probably higher end. Maybe 7 to 10.
Got it.
Additional there.
Got it. Okay. So organizations, it seems as though that they can take an incremental approach over time and adjust their budgets accordingly over time.
Right.
So it isn't in year 1 during the certification process, you don't have to commit to $80,000, $100,000, $120,000.
Exactly.
You can determine what the level of effort is with your assessor. Get a baseline understanding of the general timelines and the sort of the professional fees associated with it, and then continue to have a menu of options to choose from.
Correct.
Not only with respect to dollar amount, but over time. So you can do it at any point. You can do it never.
That's it.
I guess so.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Very cool. All right. So next question here that I have for you is, we talked a little bit about the concept of auditor days in our prior discussion.
Right.
2717, 2718.
Yeah.
How much longer is that going to take?
Yeah, so there's actually no authoritative guidance out there similar to what 27001 has with 27006, which we talked about in our first video.
That's right.
27701 actually has 27006-2, which talks about, hey, if you're another 27.
27.
Yeah. So if
I
you're,
thought you were going to tell you it was $27,000 just to make it a nice round number. It's 27,700 anyway. So all right.
So that talks you through anyways, but depending on your role, right? Are you controller, are you processor, or are you both? You're going to add this much time, and it's a percentage on top of what 27,006 is already telling you.
Got it.
Those are both, so that you can get a credit to either of those. We're accredited for both 27,001 and 27701. Now I'm confusing myself.
Yeah.
With 27,017 and 18, there's actually not an accreditation scheme out there right now. They're talking about doing it.
What does that mean, though, for an organization? There's no accreditation scheme.
That means that basically our accreditation bodies who you work with, we work with UCAS and ANAB, they would basically have specific requirements out there to hold us against. Okay. When we're performing these audits.
Got it.
Right? Are you doing this much time? Do you have this level of competency with your team to go out there and perform these audits effectively?
Yeah, okay.
So what we've done in the absence of those is we've created our own, specifically around audit time, which I think where your question was. So with 27701, it says, 27006-2 says add a percentage of the time that you're already applying for 27,001.
Got it.
With 17 and 18, we've kind of created our own in the absence of that. So we just add a certain amount of days, 3 days, I think it's for 27,017, 4 days for 27,018, to go ahead and ensure that we're applying enough additional time, because it is an additional effort, additional controls on top of what we're already doing for the 27,001.
That sounds very reasonable. What has been the response from the clients? Does it make sense for that additional uptick? Following our methodology, that all tends to be readily acceptable and understood?
Absolutely. And one thing I should have mentioned before is we're talking about 7 controls or 25 controls. A lot of folks may not think that's a whole lot, but in addition, what they do have on top of those extended unique controls, consider them, they also have what's called additional implementation guidance on top of the existing Annex A controls. So there's 114 of those, like I talked about, right?
That's right.
And it's not every control.
Is that 27,002?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
There you go. Now you're the expert. So I'll give you an example. So with processing of PII with 27,018, there is a 27,002 or a control in Annex A of 27,001 that speaks to information security awareness training, right? 27,018's implementation guidance on top of that existing control will say, well, maybe you want to talk about privacy and considerations of processing PII within your information security training, so folks are aware of the risks and their contributions there. So it's kind of things like that are additional tweaks. They're not requirements, it's guidance. So it doesn't have to be implemented, but things to consider, now that you have an ISMS and as you're adding these existing control frameworks on top.
I imagine that would be very useful for an organization considering either one of those to have that guidance.
Correct.
Consider,
Just making sure they're covering all their bases.
Yeah.
So.
Well, this video is going to be 27 minutes long if we don't stop now, but I really appreciate you coming in and answering these questions.
Thanks for having me, Ryan.
Well, that's the Truth Series, folks, where we strive to give simple answers to often complex questions. If you have any questions at all about anything that we covered in today's Truth Series, or any other questions related to other services in the compliance world, reach out to us. Thank you.